She was a cashier at a small-town grocery store. Not flashy, not loud, but with just one sentence, she was fired. An hour later, 2 military tanks rolled into town. Who was she, and what happened on that Tuesday morning? Welcome to NT, where everyday kindness becomes unforgettable. Let's begin this journey together. Emily Sanders, 32, isn't famous unless you live in Briar Hill. In this little town of fewer than 5,000 people and one single grocery store called Pine Valley Market, a warm smile can make you a household name. And Emily? She had more than just a warm smile. She had a gift for remembering. Who liked whole grain bread? Who was allergic to peanut butter? Even the curly-hailed little girl who cried if she didn't get to press the checkout button. She wasn't a manager. No big name tag, no swivel chair in the back. Just her usual spot at Register 3, right by the front door, where she'd worked for over 10 years. To Emily, scanning groceries wasn't just about beeps and barcodes. Each beep was a chance to ask, "Is your mom feeling any better today?" Swapping out the whole milk for low-fat this week? Trying something new? People trusted Emily. They'd leave their wallets with her, ask her to hold items until tomorrow, even let her watch their kids for a few minutes while they ran to the car. In a world drifting apart thanks to screens and speed, Emily made folks feel seen and never out of place. She had her chances to leave, a scholarship, an office job in the city, but she stayed, not because she lacked ambition, but because she believed kindness is a job worth showing up for. So, day after day, Briar Hill mornings began with the sound of the market's front door chime, a soft good morning, and a familiar smile at Register 3. To most people, working at a grocery store is just a job. But for Emily Sanders, it was a bridge, one that connected generations in a town where past and present quietly walked the same streets. She grew up just 2 blocks from Pine Valley Market. Her father, Harold Sanders, a Gulf War veteran, used to be the first customer through the doors each morning. Not to shop, but to feel calm again. Emily remembered how he would pause by the cereal aisle, take a deep breath and say, "Smells like a world without war." As she got older, Emily learned more than how to restock shelves or suggest granola. She learned how to notice, to see the silent signs of someone holding themselves together. An older man in a faded uniform standing too long in front of the bread? Maybe he's trying to recall something he lost. An elderly woman who always forgot her purse? Maybe she lives alone and just needs someone to talk to. Emily was also the first to suggest veteran shopping hour. Every Tuesday morning, when the store was quiet, with no music overhead, no rush, and extra-large signage on every aisle, she even wrote the announcement herself, taped near the entrance, "If you've served this country, this hour is for you. No need to hurry, no need to explain." She didn't wait for corporate approval, didn't expect a plaque or praise, but from that Tuesday on, a small group of older veterans started showing up, not just to shop, but to see Emily. To them, she wasn't just a cashier. She was the person who reminded them that they still mattered in a world that seemed to be moving too fast. The first time Mr. Walter Dean walked into Pine Valley Market, it was drizzling outside. He wore a faded army jacket, fraying at the shoulders, and walked slowly, like every step carried weight. Beside him was a dark gray German shepherd, wearing a vest clearly marked, "Civil Dog, PTSD." A few shoppers looked up, not because he was loud, but because he was so very quiet. He didn't make eye contact, didn't speak, just placed a loaf of bread and a carton of eggs gently on the belt. Emily was the first to speak. "Good morning, Mr. Dean. Haven't seen someone walk in with such a well-mannered 4-legged friend in a while." He didn't reply, but his eyes softened just a little, like the surface of a still lake catching a quiet breeze. From then on, he came every Tuesday. Never more than 3 items, always with his old cloth bag, seams worn thin. And always with Valor, the dog who never barked, never pulled. He simply walked quietly on Walter's left side, matching his pace, occasionally turning his head to check on his person, as if to ask, "You okay, buddy?" Emily noticed the smallest things, like how Mr. Dean would freeze when the aisles were crowded, his gaze drifting into memory, or how he'd never choose a register with a long line. So she arranged things, adjusted her break schedule, kept an eye out, and made sure he never had to ask for help. One morning, after he paid for his usual groceries, Emily slipped a peppermint into his bag and said, "For those front porch afternoons." He looked up, surprised, then nodded once. Nothing more was said, but from that day on, Mr. Dean would linger a few minutes longer at the exit, like he was waiting for someone to say hello. There was something in Mr. Dean's eyes that ran deeper than sadness. It wasn't grief. It was the kind of quiet that comes from having seen too much and learning to stay silent so others wouldn't feel the weight you carry. Emily never asked what he'd been through. She didn't need to know. All she knew was this: any man who walked with that much silence in his eyes had earned the right to walk into this store and feel like he belonged. Comment one word, Valar, if you believe that invisible wounds deserve just as much respect as visible ones. That morning started like any other, a soft breeze, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery next door drifting through the automatic doors. Emily had already restocked the cereal aisle and was pouring coffee for the usual delivery drivers, but something felt different. Not because of the weather, but because of who had just walked in. Karen Whitmore, the new regional manager from the city, had arrived to evaluate store performance based on corporate standards. About 5'7", blonde hair pinned up, she walked the aisles like she was inspecting a warehouse, not a small-town grocery store. She didn't smile, didn't ask for names, just strolled with a clipboard, frowning and scribbling notes. Emily greeted her like she did everyone, polite, calm, even offered a quick tour and explained how Tuesday mornings were a bit different because of their loyal veteran shoppers. But Karen wasn't interested in local relationships. All she said was, "We need full brand alignment. This place feels a little outdated." That's when Mr. Walter Dean and Valor entered, right on schedule for Veterans Hour. Emily spotted them from across the store and gave a small nod, like always. Valor trotted beside him in his vest, clearly labeled Service Dog, PTSD Support. But before they could even reach the produce section, Karen spun around, eyes narrowing like she'd caught someone red-handed. "Excuse me, dogs are not allowed in the store." Her voice was loud, too loud. A few nearby shoppers turned their heads. Emily stepped forward, keeping her tone steady. "He's a service dog, ma'am. Federal law allows PTSD support animals to accompany their handlers in food establishments." Karen shook her head. "Laws are for lawyers. I'm here to enforce policy. If another customer sees a dog inside, they're going to file a complaint, and I'm not interested in winding up on the local news." The air felt heavy, like someone had pressed pause. Mr. Dean stood still, eyes lowered. Valor tilted his head, pressing gently against Walter's leg. Emily noticed his hand tightening around the handle of his cloth bag. It was one of those moments most people miss, when a man who once survived war now felt unwelcome in a place he trusted. Emily understood, but Karen didn't. Karen came from somewhere else, a place where policies mattered more than people. She didn't see the photos on the veterans' wall. Didn't know that in Briar Hill, respect isn't something you say, it's how you treat the quietest person in the room. Register 3, the place that had rung up thousands of everyday groceries, suddenly felt like a spotlight stage. This wasn't about milk or coupons anymore. It was now a moment no one had expected, but everyone would remember. Karen Whitmore stepped into the center aisle, her face stiff as glass. Clipboard in hand, she tapped her pen against it like a ticking clock. "Emily," she said loudly, making a few customers pause mid-step. "I've made myself clear. Dogs are not permitted in this store. I don't want an explanation. I want action. Will you comply or not?" Emily looked up from the register, where Mr. Dean still stood, his hand resting on the cart. Valor sat quietly but alert, as if he too could feel the tension rise. "No," Emily said firmly. "I'm not asking him to leave. That's a service dog. He's a veteran, and this is their hour. We made that agreement with the community." Karen let out a dry laugh, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "I don't manage emotions. I manage standards. And the chain standards don't care about reasons. Whether it's a service dog or a dancing dog, It's still not allowed. Emily stepped out from behind the counter. She didn't raise her voice, didn't try to match Karen's height, but there was something solid in her stance, like a flag planted in the ground before the storm. Not every standard is worth following if it crushes human dignity, she said softly. He's not asking for pity. He's just trying to live a decent life with what's left after the war. Karen's voice cracked as she snapped back. I don't care about the war. I care about this store not getting sued. Then sue me, Emily said, her eyes steady. But don't ask me to turn away a good man and the dog that helped him survive a fear you can't even imagine. The store fell completely silent. Karen gripped her clipboard tighter, her voice sharp, like the edge of a blade. You're fired. Effective immediately. No one moved. A few workers froze mid-scan. Somewhere in the distance, a plastic bag crinkled, and in the back corner, someone quietly pressed record. Emily unclipped her name tag, folded her green apron, and looked around one last time, as if she were trying to memorize every familiar face. Then she walked to Mr. Dean, gently rested a hand on his arm, and smiled. This isn't your fault, and I don't regret a thing. She turned and walked through the automatic doors. The breeze outside was soft, but the weight left behind in the store was heavy as stone. No one said a word, but everyone knew. She had just lost her job, but held on to something far more important. Emily left Pine Valley the same way she always did. No applause, no fanfare, just the quiet swoosh of the doors and a cool breath of wind across her shoulder. She carried nothing but her folded apron and name tag. A few customers watched her go, no one brave enough to speak. Mr. Dean stood motionless, one hand resting gently on Valor's head, his eyes fixed on Emily's retreating figure. She walked down the narrow street beside the parking lot. The breeze rustled through the oak trees, bringing with it the faint scent of dust and small-town mornings. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just felt hollow, like something familiar had been pulled from her life without warning. But then, a sound. Not a car, not a siren. It was metal, heavy, grinding against pavement, a deep clank. The kind of sound you don't forget if you've ever lived near a military base. Emily stopped and turned. Inside the store, everything froze, as if someone had pressed pause on reality. Employees dropped their baskets. Shoppers let go of their carts. Every head turned toward the sound. From the far end of Main Street, 2 M1 Abrams tanks rolled forward, followed by a military Humvee flying a full-sized American flag. Behind them came a convoy of jeeps, each one marked with the emblem of the U.S. Marine Corps, making their way toward Pine Valley Market. People blinked. Hands covered mouths. Phones were pulled out. No one spoke. The glass storefront reflected the slow crawl of armored vehicles pulling up to the entrance. Then came Boots, a line of soldiers in full-dress uniform, moving with practiced discipline and solemn eyes. And at the front of the formation, Colonel Marlon Graves, commanding officer of nearby Briar Ridge Base, known in town for his veteran outreach work, stepped down from the Humvee, removed his sunglasses, and walked directly toward the store, as if he already knew exactly what had happened. Emily stood in the middle of the street, stunned. She hadn't fully understood what was unfolding, but the town of Briar Hill was about to witness something that hadn't happened in over 40 years of Pine Valley Market's quiet history. When the automatic doors opened, the soft ding sounded just like any other day, only this time it wasn't for a customer, it was for a military procession led by Colonel Graves himself. He wore a crisp uniform, boots polished like mirrors, his shoulder patch marking him as the commander of a special operations unit. His face was calm, but his eyes had the kind of sharpness that came from leading men through fire. No one dared interrupt, not even Karen, who just moments before had fired Emily. She stood frozen by the customer service counter, gripping her clipboard, now visibly trembling. Colonel Graves marched straight down the center aisle, stopping at Register 3. No introductions, no small talk. He simply lifted his phone. On the screen, a video was playing, crystal clear, taken from the bakery corner. It captured the entire confrontation between Karen and Emily. The raised voices, Mr. Dean's startled expression, and Emily's final words. "I won't turn away a good man and the dog that saved him." The video had been posted less than an hour ago to a military forum, and now it had spread. Through the base, through veteran groups, through families who had once stepped into stores and wondered if they'd be welcomed at all. Colonel Graves lowered the phone, turned to Karen. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply said, "We train men and women to risk everything for this country. The very least they deserve is to walk into a store with their dignity intact." Karen had no response. The store was silent. A few employees lowered their heads. One man placed his hand over his heart. And Mr. Walter Dean, still standing there, now had a glisten in his eyes, and valor pressed him closer than before. Colonel Graves turned toward the entrance, where Emily stood just outside, hesitant to step back in. "Miss Sanders," he said, "you'll be contacted by someone from command, but for now, I just want to say thank you. You did the right thing when no one else had the courage to." No one clapped. There were no cheers, but everyone in the store felt something shift, not just in the store's policy, but in the heart of the town itself. 3 days after that stormy morning, Emily Sanders received a letter with no return address, just a small Department of Defense logo in the corner and one line in bold: "Invitation to interview, Civilian Veterans Support Program." She read it 3 times, hands slightly shaking, unsure how the world had turned so quickly. She thought she'd have to start over somewhere else, a new job, a new town, maybe once again having to prove herself. But not this time. This time, someone else had seen her worth. The interview was held in a quiet office just outside Briar Ridge Base. No formalities, no stiff panels, just a conversation with 2 people. One, a major who'd served in Iraq, and the other, a community outreach specialist. They didn't ask for a resume. They didn't care if she could run a slideshow. Instead, they asked, "How can you tell when a veteran needs help but won't say it out loud? How do you make a service dog feel safe in a crowd? What's the most important part of rebuilding trust?" Emily didn't hesitate. No rehearsed lines, no buzzwords. She simply told them what she'd done. How she made space for Mr. Dean to wait in peace, how she adjusted restocking hours to avoid triggering veterans during busy times, how she chose to stand her ground even when it cost her everything. 1 week later, Emily became the regional coordinator for the Civilian Veteran Support Program. Her days were no longer spent behind a cash register, but standing in front of classrooms, store managers, and community leaders, sharing her story and helping others understand that veterans don't need pity. They need to be seen and respected. At her new office, just inside the main entrance, hangs a small bronze plaque. It reads, "If you stood up for us, we'll stand up for you." A month after she was fired, Emily returned to Pine Valley Market. On the outside, it looked the same, but something had clearly changed. The front glass now bore a new message in bold letters: "Service dogs and veterans always welcome." And near the entrance, where once there'd been a sales bulletin, now stood a brand new display, the Wall of Service. It wasn't fancy, just neat rows of wooden frames. But each frame held a face. Someone who had served, someone who had sacrificed, someone who had once walked quietly through this store with heavy eyes and heavier memories. There was Mr. Walter Dean, pictured with valor, now the official face of the statewide PTSD Support Initiative. There was Miss Thelma, a former field medic during the war. There were handwritten letters, penned in blue ink, from grandchildren of veterans no longer here. And right in the center of the wall, there was one photo of someone not in uniform. It was Emily, leaning down with a warm smile at Register 3, handing change to an elderly man. Beneath the photo, etched on a small bronze plate, were the words, "To the one who remembered all our names, even when we forgot our own." The wall didn't just make shoppers pause, it made them feel. Soon, people began bringing photos of their own loved ones who had served, asking to have them added. Some offered to pay for more frames. One local school even brought students on a field trip just to learn the stories behind the faces. To Emily, it felt almost unreal. A wall so still and quiet, yet filled with reminders that sacrifice should never be forgotten, and gratitude should never be just words. People in Briar Hill still talk about that morning when tanks rolled up to a grocery store. For a town like this, it was unforgettable. But what mattered even more was what came after. Emily and Mr. Walter's story traveled farther than anyone could have predicted. It showed up in a viral social media post shared by veterans across the country. A short news clip on local TV became the focus of a national segment titled "Small Actions, Big Change." And Karen Whitmore, the woman who once fired Emily, now stood beside her at veteran training workshops, not because she had to, but because she'd learned something even harder than doing the right thing. Sometimes, admitting you were wrong is how you start doing what's right. And Emily? She never returned to the register, but every Tuesday morning she still stops by Pine Valley Market, not to manage, not to supervise, but to sit with the veterans. The same ones who once stood in silence and asked one simple question: how are you doing today? And if you listen closely, you can still hear that familiar beep beep at register 3, not from a barcode scanner, but from kindness still being passed from one generation to the next. When the noise settled, when the tanks were gone and the videos stopped trending, what remained wasn't the spectacle. It was the question we should all ask ourselves. When what's right gets pushed aside, will I step forward? Emily wasn't a hero in uniform. She didn't wear medals or earn headlines. She was just a regular woman behind a checkout lane who held on to her values even when it cost her everything, and that changed everything. This story reminds us that sometimes it's the small choices, defending a service dog, standing up for a quiet veteran, saying no when it matters, that can ripple into something much bigger than we imagined. Kindness isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. If you believe the world still needs more people like Emily, be sure to like this video and subscribe to NT Amazing Stories, where we share true stories of courage, compassion, and hope. Comment one word, Emily, if you believe that sometimes the real hero is the one who simply stands up for what's right.